Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Rehurik, the #1 sought-after authority on RFP success. And each week we bring you information, strategy, or resources to help you win more business through RFPs and have a little bit of fun doing it. So let's get this week's episode started. And today we've got with you Gina Catalano, and she's a strategic business advisor, author, and coach. And one of the reasons that I wanted to have Gina on is because y'all hear me a lot preaching about strategy and how important strategy is. And Gina is a strategic guru. She knows a lot about strategy, and I wanted her to come on and really talk to us about why it's important and what you can do to set up your strategy. So Gina, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, and full disclosure, this is our second time we've tried this. Gina and I had some technical difficulties last week in trying to record this, so I'm thrilled that she was willing to come back after there were my tech issues. See, we all have challenges that we have to overcome, right? So let's go ahead and start out by having you tell us a little bit about your background and what it is you do.
Great. So my background, I have kind of a mixed background. One of my friends and colleagues always calls me the CEO's Swiss Army knife.
Nice.
And that's a nice way of saying that I have done a lot of different things, and maybe I'm not as real deep sometimes in some things, but it's made me well positioned, I think, to work with a lot of my clients. So my background is I started out in higher education. I morphed over into manufacturing consulting and program development, and that was really an awesome time. Ended up going and working for some clients, and ended up managing a couple of manufacturing companies at the C-suite level. And through that, about 6-7 years ago, started my own consulting business and haven't looked back since then. I primarily work with CEOs and leadership teams to help them kind of get unstuck and get their, how can I say this, to get their businesses to the next level, typically. So setting strategies, of course, is super, super important as part of that process.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I said this a couple minutes ago. I talk a lot about strategy because, what I see it for people bidding on RFPs, I see it kind of threefold as the big overarching strategy for your business. And then you've got to have a little bit of a sub strategy there for business development. Like, how are you going to go out and get the business? And then even further from that, what is your bidding strategy on each opportunity that comes in the door? But, I think we can sometimes throw that word strategy around a lot, but what do we even mean when we talk about strategy?
I think a lot of times, especially when you work with founder-led organizations, and a lot of the CEOs are super visionary, right?
Yeah.
And because if you're creating something that doesn't yet exist or doesn't exist in the form that it is, you have to be visionary because you're one of the few people that see your company in the next iteration.
Yeah.
But I think that vision, I always say, the strategy is the highway for vision. So if vision is your destination, then strategy is that highway. And even with the highway, you don't always know exactly where you're going to go. And so the execution is the stops that you make along the way. And when you put it in those simple terms, I think a lot of times people think, oh, I thought it has to, it has to be like 5 parts. I have to go to do, I read this Harvard Business Review article, or I have this, we have to do 5 weeks of strategic planning. And the reality is why most strategies fail from my mind is that they aren't simple enough, and they aren't well explained to the folks that have to implement them. And I always laugh. I said, when the folks on your team start making fun of you for talking about the strategy, then you've actually accomplished your mission of getting them to understand where you're trying to go. Because
That's
John
great.
Cotter always says something like, what is it? Leaders under communicate by a factor of 1,000. And we're already sick of talking about it 10 times, right? So think about
Yeah.
that over the course of an organization. I don't know how that matches what you've worked with in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And I agree with you on the simplicity of it, right? Because I do think that people think they need to get so fancy. And I will talk to people all the time that say, oh, I went online and I found this outline for a business plan. And that's what they think of when they think of strategy. Um, but but overcomplicating it does just mean like, okay, you do this exercise for nothing and then you put it in a drawer and nobody ever looks at it and you don't communicate it. And so that's a really important point. Keep it simple, right?
Yeah, and focused.
And
And
focused.
focused in terms like for a business development strategy, which I'm assuming with when you're writing RFPs, you're trying to generate partnerships and revenue and future projects within the organization. And I work in the startup community too. I volunteer in the startup community, and so every new startup is going to be $1 billion idea
Yeah.
because they have so many different verticals. And we usually try to identify one that they can hone in so small because, ironically, the more focused you are, the more impactful you can be.
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh, yes.
it's so counterintuitive, right? But when you think about it, and I learned this when I was writing my book editor was just fantastic. And one of her big issues, if you really want to serve many people, you have to focus in the one client that you know so very well that you're
Yeah.
trying to serve with your book. Because strangely enough, if you can get into the soul of who you're trying to serve, you end up being so clear and so believable that everybody wants to do that because they
Yep.
feel your passion. And I think the same is with RFPs. If you can be so honed in on that particular, whether it's a government organization or a very large company, they want to know that you understand them specifically, like the back of your hand, right?
Yes, everybody, did you hear that? Did you hear that? That was key right there. I love it. Yeah, they really I'm the same way, I think about that in my business though, is, when I first started deciding to really own the RFP space, it was scary. It's scary to hone in on your niche or on that one person, that one client that you're trying to talk to. So I get it, but it is counterintuitive, but it is so important and your business will change completely. I mean, have you seen that? I would assume you've seen that a lot with your clients is when they actually are willing to do that, that it will change the trajectory of their business. Is that true for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm doing, I have a great, I'm not great. It sounds boastful, but I do have a good knack of being able to help people connect their business development strategy with their operational strategy. So one of the things that I often do is like, let's hone in on your ideal client, right?
Yeah.
So with the ideal client, let's talk to that ideal client because if you want that ideal client, we usually want more of that ideal client.
Yes.
So like I typically will say, so for example, I have a client that is a furniture manufacturer. They work in a certain very narrow niche. They work in a certain space. And so we've actually identified, we went back through and we said, we really like what happens with this one customer. We like what happens with this other customer. So we actually name the customer so that we're
Love it.
saying, how do we serve Bob?
Yeah.
And would Bob like this? And because most people know who their favorite customers are, especially
Yeah.
I'm all over the favorite customers, but I'm also the favorite customers that make you money, because sometimes we have favorite customers that don't make us any money. Once
Right.
we've established that their favorite customer has made them money, I'm all over that. you know. But what we do is say, what are their buying patterns? What do they need? What are their top 3 issues that they're looking to solve? So for example, a lot of times we have products. I have a startup that has a product that is going to be pretty cool. I can't really talk about it because I'm under NDA, but they're going to be able to serve the government. They're going to be able to serve private industry.
Hmm.
Um, and they're writing grant proposals right now, right,
Yep.
for both at the federal government level, for an agency level, and then also through like a foundation like NSF, right?
Oh,
And
yep.
so they're 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 selling almost the same product, but they have to redo it based on what the the needs are for those particular
Oh,
folks.
yes, you're like speaking my language, because it drives me crazy that we tend to focus on writing from our perspective, or selling or writing an RFP response from our perspective. Here's how great we are. Here's all the things that we can offer you. And we like to be all inclusive. Well, we don't want to leave anything out. And then we overwhelm them, and they can't connect at all to how we're really going to solve their problem, how we're going to make them feel better, or how we're going to make them, get what they need or want. And I love that you're saying that you've got to get specific. Now, here's one of the things, though, that I hear from people all the time is like, well, I don't know that. How do I even get that information?
That's a good question. I think that if you what from the RFP side, I always will say, who are they buying from already? So if you can figure that out, and a
Mm,
lot of times people do know that. They do know who they're currently buying from. And if they've been in the industry for a long time, and somebody of the success, at the higher levels that have, if you're in the 5 to $30 million range, typically you understand who they're buying from already, because there's
yeah.
out in the industry, there's the industry chatter, right? So
If you're
then
paying
try to figure,
attention, which, sorry to interrupt you, but if you're
yeah,
paying attention, which by all means you should be, and if you
right.
were not, you need to go back and think about that. Um, Before you go into your next point, why is that important for them to know?
I think
Who?
understanding what the differentiation is, because if the
Okay.
differentiation between who they're currently buying from
Yep.
and you is not, you can't offer something significantly different, or you can't make a case against a case for them that's going to be um, so obvious, then I think it makes it tough, and you're more than likely just to copy whoever else they're purchasing from, and it's going to seem inauthentic.
And then
Um,
it comes down
and
to kind
yeah,
of comes down to price, which everybody complains about, but I'm like, it really shouldn't come down to price if you do your job on the front end.
right, because they're looking for somebody to solve your problem.
Yeah.
If you have a new technology, for example, which I think happens a lot in the RFP sector. So I have a startup client that's doing really well, who has a new technology, but he sells into very large companies. And we were talking about it, and I said, so we had to identify who is your champion at the
Mhm.
company, like what department. It's the vice president. Is it a vice president? Is it the tech guy that's fixing something all the time with this particular issue? Who is it? You got to identify. We got to know who that is. So we identify who that is. So his people buy because they either how they're going to feel from purchasing your product,
Yep.
or and a combination of how you're going to fix their problem,
Yes.
right? I mean,
Yep.
is that how you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
So either way, you've got to get into the person's you got to get the person in that position to say, hi, I've just found Lisa has the best thing ever, and I need to go shout it to the rooftops. What's going to make him or her do that? And you have
Beautiful.
to have somebody, especially in bigger companies, that are willing to carry your water for you a little bit there. And even in bidding situations where they're supposedly, it's all analytical and it's
Yeah.
all on a numbers and everything, there will be things that trigger, because you've done a really good job of honing in on those people, that are, because people basically want their problems to be solved. That's it. They don't care about what you can do unless you can solve their problem.
Exactly. And it's true, one of the things that I say a lot throughout my book, or probably on every podcast I ever do, is that there is actually a human being on the other end of reading that RFP response.
Yes.
And we inevitably make judgments, whether we want to admit it or not. We're human beings, and we will make judgments on the way things look, or the way things feel, or, anything that you do in that RFP. And so the closer you are to knowing what they want or need, the closer you are to the people that are reading it, and can get into their psyche, the better off you are. The more you're going to be able to get that message across to them and make them feel like you're saying we should make them feel. And I love that so much. Yes.
This sounds a little touchy feely, but it definitely works. I always say, who is your audience's, and I got this from my book editor, but I do this in my companies now. What is your audience or your customer's dream come true? So whatever their
Love
dream
it.
come true with work,
Yeah.
typically. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's their dream come true? Well, the RFP would answer every single question correctly, succinctly. There would be the ROI would be clear, you know,
Yep.
choosing you would be clear, that they would be able to understand how the investment would translate across the board. What problems have you already solved for them,
Mm.
or identified? Like they did proposal like, oh my gosh, this person's in my head,
Right.
right?
Yes. I love that.
And so, and that applies to a business development strategy in general. So like if you're shipping a product, how does it show up at that person's dock? How do you
Mhm.
invoice them? How do you follow up? I'm from the manufacturing sector, so I'm always thinking about physical things. But how
But it's
would,
the same thing, right?
yeah,
I mean, it
how do you have,
translates
how
over.
was the service process that goes with it? How does the reorder process go? How does the problem resolution process go? I mean, what's from their standpoint? Because to your point earlier, that you said something really important. We're like, we want to list everything that we offer. So basically, we're throwing up on them and
Yep.
expecting them to dig through it to figure out the nuggets. That's not very customer satisfied. That's not very, I mean, that's a little gross, but
It is not
that's
an
not,
appealing thought.
it's not an appealing thought. So think about it too. And we've all had that experience when
Yeah.
somebody is just shown up and it's like the old encyclopedia salesman from when I was a kid, right? They
Yeah.
show up and like all the different things and everything. You're like, I don't want an encyclopedia.
Exactly. And what's cool about what you're talking about too is that it sounds like you're really reverse engineering things, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
starting with, okay, what's the outcome that we're looking for? What's the end goal? And then how do we the strategy is then kind of pulled out from that end result. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, part of it has a lot to do with working, helping people. Early in my career, I did a lot of continuous improvement with lean manufacturing, just in time, and so in order to take a really convoluted system and figure out how to make it simpler, we had to pull it apart into
Yeah.
the sections and do that. Now, if anybody's read Eric Ries's book, Lean Startup, and then there's customer, they've done a lot of work
Yes.
with that. And Lean Startup isn't just for startups, right? It's for anybody that's trying to do a new business development um, opportunity within their organization. And a big part of that is customer discovery. So that's where we talk about what you're talking about in terms of understanding what the customer is really looking for. And the simpler we make it, the better it is, because it's harder to remember all that stuff.
It's harder to remember, and really all you need to do is kind of find that one or two things. Like we're trying to solve for 80 million things. What's going to happen in a year, or what's going to happen in 3 years with this customer? What if they need this? What if, what if, what if? It's like stay focused, and you said that earlier, right? Simple and focused. It's interesting too, and kind of circling back to something else you said. I had a client once, and one of the big things that I work with my clients on is, what are your differentiators? How are you going to, right? And you said that earlier too. And so, they try really hard to just pull it out of their head. And I'm like, all right. And this was a logistics company, right? So they do transportation and that kind of stuff. And so I said, do you have a driver that's here right now that can come in and talk to us? And they brought one of their drivers in. And I said, why do you like working here? Like, what do you think sets this company apart from other logistics? And oh my gosh, he was like this gold mine of information, because he's the one that delivers stuff. He's the one that shows up to customers on time, looking good, building relationships, all of that. And it was that simple. And I wanted to kind of convey that story, because you had mentioned earlier, it's not just about what you know, but you said you kind of tap into their clients, right? So you're not just asking them about the strategy, you're trying to help them understand, like, who else can give us information that can help us with the pieces of this puzzle.
Absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned the driver. Years ago, when I was running a pretty fast growing company, we outgrew our space, and our UPS driver actually found us our next space because he wanted
Oh,
us, he
cool.
loved us, and he wanted to, he knew we were growing,
Yep.
and he wanted us to stay on his route. And he
That's
found
cool.
an off-market property for us because he knew that the other people were moving out. And so we actually had a realtor, but it was our UPS driver. And, at the time, FedEx wasn't doing a lot of ground packages in those days, but they were starting to try to come for our business. And we really didn't want to move from UPS because we didn't want to lose our driver, because he did things for us. We were always late, so we were always pushing up
Right.
against the 7 o'clock deadline. He would arrange for trucks to come back and do during our high season. We shipped about 20,000 shipments. And so that equated to maybe 100,000 small packages.
Yeah.
And yeah. And so during our busy season, he would, find another driver to come back. He would work with a dispatch. And so
Huge.
that's a great example of somebody that really understood. And we didn't try to abuse it or anything. He was just like our saving grace. But to your point about bringing in that driver at the logistics company, the people that touch the customer, right? They're the
Yeah.
ones that understand how to make things work. And once you get away, the further away from the customer you are, the more likely you are to not have those touch points that are going to be super valuable in writing an RFP.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. What a cool story, because then, and I know that people that are listening to this can relate to having a good relationship with that driver, because when you're at the last minute trying to get an RFP out the door, I
Oh
know we
yeah.
used to know their routes. We'd follow them. We'd go to the airport, all sorts of stuff. So, but it is true, because you're probably not going to leave you're not going to leave UPS because of that one person. One
Yeah.
person.
It was interesting when he retired. We were just so bummed. I mean, it was kind of like losing a member of the company, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. This is such great conversation. So, um, for people that are listening that are like, okay, you guys have convinced me, I've got to get a strategy. Where do they start?
There's a lot of tools out there. In my practice, we use a couple things. We use the entrepreneurial operating system. One of my colleagues uses that because it's very simple and it's a way to put the process in. That comes out of the book Traction.
Okay.
It talks about vision and having a visionary and an integrator. I am an integrator with a little bit of visionary, and so that's the whole thing about taking the business development strategy. They're big on everything being focused on, but you can take any system. I just like it because it's simple.
Yeah.
Anything that's simple.
Yes.
It's interesting. It's old quote from a long time ago, but Michael Porter said the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. And
Wow.
I'm always trying to get people to just strip away things for that reason, because we're creatures of habit, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how many times do you take the same way to work? How many times do you do the same thing? I mean, our brains are wired to be habitual. Good or bad, it doesn't care. They're totally
Right.
wired to be habitual. So unless you disrupt that pattern, you will keep adding on things to be, you'll keep having those patterns happening to you.
Yeah.
So you've got to disrupt it. But I think you can take the simple strategy. Any of the one-page plans I love, because again, it forces you to identify your key strategies. And if you can only fit it on one page, it can't be that long,
Right. Right.
right?
Although that
Uh,
sometimes is harder to do, right? It's
it's
sometimes easier
well,
to write a
you know,
10-page plan than a one-page plan most of the time.
yeah, it's like in marketing, everybody wants the "just do it" tagline from Nike. You know,
Yep.
but how many times do you see a tagline that's super long? Because it's much more challenging to get the simple. But everybody understands. I mean, "just do it" is so quintessential to Nike. Exactly what that means. But
In
that's
3 words.
three
Yep.
words. 3 words,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's so brilliant. So what would you say is the biggest mistake that people make? It might be what we're talking about, but what do you see as the biggest mistake people make when they're trying to set a strategy?
I think they're trying to have the strategy serve everybody. And I
Mm,
think sometimes also not having an outside person like yourself to come and pick holes in it. I think I said, when I talk about Michael Porter saying to do less, I think about a client that I had that was going from had a 45-day sales process and needed to get it down to 2 weeks because they were losing so much in there. They had a seasonal business and they were losing so much business because people weren't willing to do that. And the essence of that was doing less. It was, we made it so much more of an elegant process. And that was last January we did that project. And I was just talking to them the other day, and they said they still are at 2 weeks and they are hitting all their sales they were losing so much business just because they had a limited opportunity. And what they said is they had built in all these things into their strategy about what they were trying to do. They simplified who they got rid of people. Some people they chose not to serve anymore, first of
Okay.
all.
Yep.
So they became very tuned in to the person that was willing to pay, $15,000 to $25,000 for their service. That was their key customer. So they kept saying, well, what about the guy that comes in for $8? And everybody kept, by the end of the time we were working on, they're like, we're not serving that person anymore. We're going to
love it.
hastily give them another resource, again, because we kept saying it over and over again. And then they got rid of a lot of checks and balances that they had done previously that they didn't need to do anymore.
Nice.
And they were able to redeploy people. They were having challenges finding people. So it wasn't like somebody lost their job in that process. They were able just to process more orders. And so it goes all the way down to a business development
Yep.
surfacing strategy, right?
Yeah.
All the way down to that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, right? Because I think a lot of times companies think of it as this big kind of up in the clouds thing. We set the strategy, and then, and to your point at the beginning of the call, is they don't always communicate that out to their employees then, because they don't think it matters to the driver or to the customer service rep on the phone. But it does, because it should. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gina, but shouldn't that business development strategy follow you through everything? That's
It
like
should.
the thread that goes through your entire business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should, and that's the great thing about following something like a one-page business plan or, EOS, for example, or most strategies, a good strategy. So what this is the tip for the listeners. A good strategy development process will cascade easily down to your entry-level folks within the organization. Everybody will understand it.
That I was just going to say, what do you mean by that? So everybody understands it. That's important too, because sometimes we get a little too fluffy or theoretical or whatnot with the strategy.
Right, or it's antithetical to their values of their organization.
Yep.
And whether or not you have stated values, there are values of their organization. So if you say that we're always on time and we always meet the customers on time, I'm just going to use one that people use a lot.
Yeah.
And then you have a 50% on time, you are in conflict with your values. If that's part of your values, if you treat people with respect and yet supervisors or leaders are yelling at each other, or you're, hanging up on customers, which I've seen, scary as that is, you're not matching your value set, and that conflict comes out. So again, the strategy everybody should know. I heard a podcast yesterday, somebody was talking about that delight was that was their key value, key filter that they put. They believed in employee delight, they believed in customer delight and supplier delight, and they measured it, and they had a net promoter score of 76 with their customers, and they sold for I work with companies that want to sell, and it was a really awesome multiple that they sold their business for, because he said when they started the process, they had all kinds of stuff. What they realized that they were really good at was delighting the customers and making sure that happened throughout. And they did that before their profit filter, which I thought was awesome. That doesn't always work. You have to have a lot of systems in place, but that's so simple, right?
I was just going to say that. You know what's so cool about that is that's so simple, and it's scary as shit. I mean, I'm going to say that it is scary to get that granular and say, we're going to build a whole company on delight. I mean, what? That sounds kind of crazy, right? But it is. So listeners, pay attention to that and think about the fact that Gina just said they sold their company probably for a lot more than they would have been able to if they hadn't have owned that simple concept. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. But
Yeah,
how many
it's
companies are willing to do
interesting.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's super interesting that and again, it comes back to what I said at the beginning, right? Focus.
Yeah.
So when you think about, um, I'm assuming, I know you write both with government contracts and with big company contracts because they're the
Yep.
ones that are doing the RFP. So if the person making the decision is going to be a program manager at a defense, part of a defense agency, that part of their bonus, for example, or how they're rewarded is the ability to come in on time, the ability to have they're servicing maybe the folks over that are in military operations overseas. They want to make sure that all the people are safe, all the
Yep.
different things. I mean, take that passion on that they have in doing what they're doing, right? And then in
Yeah.
putting it through that filter, if you can create the filter again through your ideal person that you're serving, it's going to show up in your RFP.
Yep. Absolutely. Wow, some great, great, great advice, Gina. This has been such a fun conversation. I think you and I could probably talk for another hour about strategy, and we're most definitely on the same page. So I love it. So if you could just, I know you've given already a whole lot of nuggets, but what's one key takeaway that you'd love for our listeners to have?
If you're going to let me, I'm going to have two.
Okay, I like it. Be a renegade. Right up
Yeah,
my
and
alley.
I am. Um, right size your strategy to the amount of time you have, and value that you can place on it, so that it's proportioned. That would be the one thing. And then the second thing is, 80% will get you 100% there. And what I mean that a lot of times um, we spend a lot of time trying to really fine tune something as
Mhm.
opposed to getting it done and being complete. And I think in strategy, it's better to have an 80% great strategy and implement it and then be able to iterate on it than work a really long time for the perfect strategy and not be able to actually ever do anything about it. And so I say that all the time to groups. And it's amazing how much more time you have when you focus on getting at 80, because B minus work is passing.
Right, right. Absolutely. That is a super great tip. And I think you're right because we can get caught up in it needing to be perfect, and B minus is passing. That's beautiful. All right, Gina. So we are out of time, but I want to know how people can get in touch with you if they want to talk to you about helping their company or uh, just learn more about you. How can they get in touch with you?
All right, great. They can reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, and we can have that in the show notes. But
Yep.
my email, I'll have the email is gina@venturesolutionsus.com.
Okay.
And for your listeners, if they're interested, my book, Tandem Leadership, How Your Number Two Can Make You Number One, is available. And I would like to give that away for free to any of your listeners who would like that. And they can go to tandemleadershipbook.com/free.
Nice. Thank you so much for that. We all love free, especially when we know it's going to be a great book. So that's very generous. Thank you. Well,
Oh,
thank you
sure.
so much for being here, Gina. Great conversation. A lot of really great golden nugget tips here for our listeners. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, you have been listening to the RFP Success Show. As always, we would love for you to subscribe if you like what you're hearing. Subscribe, leave a message, and certainly share with your colleagues. So until the next time, signing off.